I'd like to invite Angela and Antoinette back to the stage. We're going to open the floor to questions. Then we've got about 15 minutes before we continue for afternoon tea and continued discussion space. So I'm hoping that the roving microphones are working again.
Hello. Yes, it's working.
It appears to be working. So, questions for the people panel.
Come on.
Don't be scared.
Don't be shy. Ah.
I'm sort of thinking of this as I go, but my question relates to the intersectional issues in relation to social justice. And in Queensland at the moment, for example, there's a really strong push by Torres Strait Islander communities to maintain their right to traditional hunting. And it's a really, it's a very, very profound issue because it's a very core traditional right and practice, cultural practice. At the same time, then there's animal welfare laws, and I'm just wondering where the panel might sit in regards to that.
I'm not an expert. You said it in your newspaper. That's Torres Strait Islanders.
Oh, great. That's fine. Thank you. That would have to be the most culturally sensitive question. No, look, I think it's a really important question. I was actually in contact with the producer before that story hit because I'd done some work with her and I knew it was coming, and I actually had a conversation with her about it, and I said, you are going to do this in a way that it's not going to marginalise Aboriginal people more than they already are. In this country, we are butchering hundreds of millions of animals in horrific circumstances every day. If we're going to show footage of traditional hunting practices that are cruel, I don't want that focus to be the focus. I want the focus to be on the fact that it's about animal rights issues. So for me, when I saw the footage, which I was prepared for, it was very traumatic. And within a few hours in my inbox, of course, the usual emails arrive, and I was invited to join petitions and emails. And I actually spent a fair bit of time composing my own email rather than sending off an email, because for me, what I wanted to say was that I fully support it. I'm a vegan. I fully support traditional hunting practices. I think if they are sustainable and if they are humane and responsible, then they are entitled to be privileged under our law, because we took that land and we took away people's rights to their traditional practices. I also think that hunting, when it's done humanely, is far better than farming practice and intensive farming. But what we saw, that footage that night, was not traditional hunting practices. In fact, what we saw were people who were engaged in quite modern practices, dealing with animals in a cruel way for corrupt purposes, which was killing threatened species and selling them on the commercial black market. There was nothing about that. And there were Aboriginal people in that program who were stepping up in their community saying, this is not traditional, this is not right. So I think what we're dealing with is people who are abusing their own culture and abusing the privileges that they have within their communities to do those dreadful things to animals. So I would argue that they weren't traditional hunting practices, and what I would like to see is I would like to see laws that make sure that people can be prosecuted and not use that as a blanket if in fact that's not how they're relating to those animals. Yeah?
Over here, our wonderful co-convener.
I have a question for Antoinette. Antoinette, you gave me shivers down my spine when you said that the removal of children from their families devastated Aboriginal communities, and now we're removing mothers from their families. Do you think we will ever learn the lesson of history?
I hope so. When I visited Dame Phyllis Frost prison not so long ago, there were more than 23 Aboriginal women in there, and I think there was probably about 27 Aboriginal women, and we'd taken our Sisters' Day out into the prison. We'd called it Sisters' Day In for the day. And all of those women came to our Sisters' Day Out, and we had our lawyers available for that, for the day. And I think out of the 27 Aboriginal women, about 15 of those women saw our child protection lawyer, because each one of those women had at least 2 or 3 children that were in out-of-home care or permanent care. And I hope that White Australia does learn its lesson. I guess we can just keep challenging the system. You know, we've got huge issues around child protection intervention, limited resources in our organisation to be able to work with women who have had their children removed as a result of violence, escaping violence. Yeah, I guess we just have to keep going, and I just encourage you to hear what Aboriginal people have to say about the situation.
Oh, all of a sudden we've got hands everywhere. I'm going to go right over there because no one from that side of the room has no question.
My question's for Angela. I wanted you to elaborate a bit more on how personhood law would affect litigation against the meat industry.
I missed the first part of the question.
Oh, elaborate more on how a personhood law for animals would affect litigation against the meat industry and what that would entail.
Well, the problem we have at the moment is about standing, so that's the real issue. We have a situation where we've got so many layers to be able to act on animals' interests. So if we could establish the legal personhood of animals, then a lawyer could act on behalf of the animals directly. We wouldn't have to go waiting for that third-party interaction. That's one of the key issues that we have at the moment, is that problem of getting in the door in the first place. So it's stopping so many things. We're reliant on basically complicit agencies to determine the best interests of animals. So, such as, for example, Department of Agriculture, which, if you saw that hideous drama that was unfolding in terms of live export last year, where they were doing everything they could in terms of damage control to prevent the public from seeing the footage in the first place and once it happened, and yet they are charged with the responsibility of looking after the best interests, the animal welfare interests of those animals, and clearly that's not happening. So without the legal personhood of animals, we're always going to have that human interception, that human-centric view of what an animal's best interests are, and we can see that as a result of that, we're not getting good outcomes.
My question's for David. I'm just curious and would like to know more about the case or cases which are arising about the asylum seekers which have been granted refugee status but then have this ASIO security issue put on them, and what are the steps to go about kind of rectifying this? Will it be something for the courts or Parliament? I mean, I assume both at some stage, but I'm just interested to know more on that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ultimately at the moment, it's the way it's looking at the moment, unfortunately, is that it may well be something for the courts. What ought to happen is that there should be a modified natural justice process. So there is none at the moment. So people are given this adverse assessment which consigns them to indefinite detention even though they're found to be a refugee. And by the way, just to explain how serious this is, not only in terms of human consequence but legal consequence too, under the Refugees Convention it is possible to exclude someone from protection even though they've been found to be in need of it if, for example, there are concerns of a security nature. So these people have not been found under the Refugees Convention to be excluded. It's purely because of an assessment by our intelligence agency that they are consigned to indefinite detention. There are some, in other countries, better approaches to this where, having regard to the sensitive nature of intelligence information, there is a modified, sort of, if you like, protected process for where someone can be given some form of natural justice. In other words, they can be told the nature of the concerns against them and have an opportunity to respond to them. And I can assure you, working in the system for many years, that not only does the Department of Immigration make mistakes, but so does ASIO. There are examples, clear examples, where adverse assessments have been changed because they're found to be baseless. And so, the reform, what ought to happen in terms of reform is fairly clear in a broad sense. There is no obvious movement on that at the moment. The government's well aware, it's been made well aware and is well aware of alternatives to the current situation, and has given no undertaking at the moment to move on that. And so in those sorts of circumstances, often where policy fails, the law must step in. So I think that it's very much moving toward challenges. There have indeed been some legal challenges so far, and the current situation is with those challenges is that by and large, I think the best way to describe it is that by and large, courts have found that you can't look behind the reasons for the decision of ASIO. So in other words, there's sort of the precedent's not good at the moment. That's not to say that there aren't other arguments that could be brought before the courts, and there's every possibility that will happen.